2021 had a lot of disappointments. Hi everyone, my name is Vina, aka Miss WC Reader, and welcome welcome back to my channel. Today I'm just coming at you with another video to discuss my worst books of 2021. I decided to narrow down the list to 5 books, even though there were way more than 5 books and some of them were by the same authors. I decided to keep the list short and sweet because I felt a lot of ranting coming on. So if you're sensitive to people talking about your favorite books, this isn't going to be the video for you, because the ones that I hated were among this year's most hyped. So in no particular order, let's talk about these books. So the first book that I have on my worst list was The Perfect Play by G.S. Carr. And this was actually a novella that I listened to via Audible. I thought it was going to be a really cute sports romance, but instead it was a Not Like Other Girls story. So it follows a small town librarian and an NFL wide receiver who wake up married in Vegas. So all the potential to be a fun, smutty, quick read. And instead, this one was like a chore to get through, even though the running time was so short. So, like I said, it was not like Other Girls. The heroine, whose name I don't remember, was one of those girls who sits and reads books in the club when everybody's dancing. Yet the NFL wide receiver who can get all the women he wants and is known for a player was completely smitten with her, to the point where he was asking her brother, like who he worked with, questions to find out little things about her so that he got to know her really well, which was actually a little bit creepy, but it was painted as romantic in the story. And then the football player, there was just nothing to love about him either. It's like, he plays football, but he's smart, therefore he's the perfect man. And I was just like, ugh. I don't know how they took this novella with a simple, easy to execute premise and did it so badly. But this actually kind of almost turned me off from librarian stories. It was just that bad. The next book that is on my worst list was Dial A For Aunties, which I was excited to read it because well in advance it was optioned for a Netflix film. So that intrigued me. But this book was horrible. Horrible. The publisher clearly had no clue what type of story it was or what they wanted it to be. And I don't even think the author knew what it was supposed to be. Like, this book was pitched as a rom-com and it wasn't a rom-com. This book was pitched as a mystery and it wasn't a mystery. Like, I went into it thinking it was going to be some kind of cozy mystery. It was not like that at all. Because you already know who did it. It's more just like a bunch of wacky hijinks. But the wacky hijinks are like 80s and 70s style wacky hijinks. They in no way, shape, or form work for any time within the 2000s or beyond, because we have a thing called cameras and cell phones. Therefore, they could have never pulled it off. Basically, this girl named Madeline Chen goes on this blind date with this guy. He tries to molest her and she ends up killing him. So then, instead of calling the police, she calls her aunt. And by the way, her aunts were such caricatures. I can't even remember their names because they were just referred to like aunt, like this aunt 1 and aunt 2 and this aunt and that aunt. Like, it didn't even make any sense. They never felt like real people. And they were so stereotypical. And this was one of those books where the author is clearly not from the US, and everything that she learned about the US, she learned solely on TV. So, and set it in generic California. And it didn't flow well. So like the aunts with their broken English and their stereotypes, and it was a mess. So they're running around trying to hide this dead body while they also have this like wedding business where they have to cater this wedding, and they're doing all these different services for this wedding, and it was just a mess. Like, no way no one would have seen them running around the grounds of this hotel with this dead body. And the fact that they managed to pull it off with most of the people, just ridiculous. And then the romance aspect. Oh my gosh. This character was supposed to be, I think, 26, but she read like 15. Like, it was supposed to be like a second chance romance with her college boyfriend, and it was miscommunication trope at its worst. Like, it just made no sense why they broke up. And it was really, she's like, her excuse was they were getting too close, and like she didn't want her aunts to meet him or some shit. It made no sense. They had no chemistry. I can't even call this a satire because it wasn't funny. And I don't care how much this book acknowledged that it was ridiculous. It was just not good. The writing was not good. I'm actually kind of turned off from this author. I don't think I'm going to read any more of her work because I read her adult debut and I read her YA debut, and they both sucked and they both put me in a reading slump. So I'm not even interested in checking out the second in this series. I don't know how it's continuing into a series because it's just such a ludicrous plot. Like, you have to suspend an incredible amount of belief to make it work. And overall, the writing was just clunky and no one vibed together to make it worth it. So all my mutuals who read this book and had nothing but 5 stars and positivity to say, what the fuck were y'all reading? What were y'all reading? I don't understand how critical reading skills just went out the window when it came to this story, because Ace of Spades was not a good book. It wasn't a good look at private school. Like, clearly the author knew nothing about US private school, and she just didn't even bother to research. I don't know where she did her research at, because she just kind of incorporated stuff from UK private school and but set this book in generic US, and I'm like, UK private school is different. We don't use any of those terms here in the US. That's not how private school works. That prefect shit, we don't have that, nor would we care about it. And so already there, it started off clunky and weird. Then, like, she claimed to be inspired by Gossip Girl, but there was really no Gossip Girl. And this did not feel like an elite private school. It felt like a very generic private school. And I've never come across a private school within the US where the hood and the rich neighborhoods are both in easy walking distance. How is this town set up? Because that would never happen. They usually build these schools in areas where the elite are far away from the other people for a reason. On top of that, let's talk about the characters. Devon had every stereotype you could imagine. I'm just going to list off some of them, and like I said, it's not even all, because there were just so many, it was hard to remember them all. So you have his mom, who is a single mom, kids by multiple baby daddies. She's struggling with multiple jobs. They live in the hood. Devon has so many different siblings to deal with. At one point, they're all sharing a meal, like one meal, because they don't have enough money to afford food for everybody to eat. There was some shit where she said they were so poor he couldn't even afford shoelaces. And I'm like, what? And then his dad was in jail. His best friend was a drug deal slash boyfriend was a drug dealer. Again, they were just like, it was constantly emphasizing how poor and downtrodden he was, on top of being gay, which is a whole other dynamic that played into the drama. Like, he's getting bullied by the boys in the neighborhood for being gay. And I'm like, why was so much put upon Devon? It felt like a caricature of what somebody thinks a hood black person is in America. And the author, being from the UK, clearly did not do her research. And this was offensive and anti-black. Blackness was never painted as something to be proud of or happy about. Like, he hated his neighborhood. Chiamaka was a whole white identified person and it was never addressed. Like, she was biracial, and there was just no reason for her to be biracial because it absolutely did nothing to the narrative or the story. Her dad was barely even present. Her mom was a little bit more present, but not really. And that biracial dynamic never really played in well. It was never explored well. It just was kind of like, oh, she's biracial and she hates her curly hair. Been there, done that years ago. Let's get a new story. And there was so much going on with Devon that there was less put into her character beyond just her being like a bitch. I guess that was supposed to be the gossip girl. Like, she was supposed to be a Blair Waldorf, but she really wasn't a Blair. And then we didn't really explore academia that well. Like I said, none of the private stuff regarding the private school made any type of sense. And then it just heavily focused on racism. But the racism plot was so over the top and so ridiculous. This would never happen in a million years. And it was easy to be actually detached from the plot because it was so over the top and ridiculous. Like, racists could look at this book and be like, well, at least I'm not that racist. That's how bad it was. Because I'm like, none of this shit would have ever happened. This school would have gotten shut down right away. Colleges would have disassociated themselves from the school so fast. You're trying to tell me that every 10 years this shit is going on there? No, not at all. And again, I am judging the people who read this book and didn't even have shit to say about Devon's background. Because, especially those of you who grew up in the hood. None of those stereotypes bothered you at all. Everybody knows somebody like that who lives in their neighborhood. Nobody has that much going on against them in their life. No one is that downtrodden. You can paint a story about somebody being poor without piling it on like a racist white person, which is basically what she did in this story. So the other black girl was one of my most highly anticipated reads for 2021. And it was another one that got a lot of early hype. It had a year-long promotion. And it had already gotten picked up for a Hulu show. So I'm like, and everybody was raving about this. Authors were loving it. So many black people in publishing were loving it. And I think they were just loving that it was set in publishing and that they felt seen among white people, because that's the only thing it had going for it. It touched on some things that could start really great conversations, but unfortunately those conversations were not actually well discussed on page, and it seems like a lot of people who loved the book just skipped over those conversations anyway, so therefore what the fuck was the point? And I'm not even sure if some of the stuff that I noticed was intentional by the author for you to notice. So the other black girl is set in a publishing office environment. We follow this character named Nella, who is an editorial assistant, and I really didn't even understand her motivation for wanting to work in publishing. She didn't seem that passionate about anything beyond that one book that she read that she felt was like the blackest thing ever. But other than that, I didn't even know, we never even found out what types of book stories she liked, what genre she liked. She didn't really have much going for her. She wasn't that fleshed out of a character. And then she was just far too passive to lead a thriller. I can't even really call this a thriller because it was more like a literary fiction with like a little bit of magical realism. And even that failed. Like, the prologue was so good and then nothing really came from it. It didn't come full circle for you to figure out why that prologue was the way it was. And there were a lot of different POVs that really added nothing. And overall, for a book about editing, this book needed an editor so badly. For most of the book, Nella is just upset because of little things she feels Hazel are doing, but the little things Hazel was doing really weren't even that bad. But immediately, once stuff starts happening in the office, instead of blaming the racist white people, she's immediately against the new black girl. She's like, oh, she's sabotaging me, this and that. She's out to get me. She's playing mind games. And I'm like, she's really not playing these Jedi mind tricks that you think she's playing. Most of the stuff she's doing is just shit that happens in an office. But since it was her first job, I guess she never experienced it before. So it was kind of painted as like black women being against black women. And I'm like, no, this could have happened regardless of the race of any other any person who just moved in. Like when you're in a job, you're trying to stand out and move up. And Hazel was trying to move up. And like I noticed right away, like Nella had a lot of internalized anti-blackness that she didn't want to address. Like she was upset because Hazel had a fine Dominican boyfriend. She was upset that she was wearing locks and just really seemed comfortable within her blackness. Like Nella considered herself the blackity black, and she loved to be up on black Twitter and felt like she was championing all these causes in the office, but really she liked being the token in the office. And there are two other black people in the office, even though they weren't in her department, and she would talk about how she would acknowledge them. She didn't really acknowledge them outside of like a few small like casual conversations. Like I don't know if she felt she was too good for them, but got mad because Hazel came in and formed good relationships with them and actually got to know them as people beyond their skin color. Like if I was supposed to hate Hazel, it wasn't happening because I'm like, for the most part, she just seemed like a normal person. It wasn't until towards the end we really saw her being like evil, and then the evilness that was a part of the plot and was making no sense whatsoever. I could have done without all that shit at the end because it wasn't even well executed, mostly because of the pacing was so off. Like we went pages upon pages upon pages of nothing but mundane things happening in the office that no one needed to care about. Like this is not a slice of life story. I don't need to read about the same thing happening day after day, and it's moving the plot nowhere. And then like I said, the additional POVs that weren't executed well, it almost was like it was trying to become a spy thriller at the end, but then nothing was ever infiltrated, nothing was properly addressed, and it felt like this story was just written to be a TV show where they're going to flesh it out more. But the main character is so unlikable, I don't want to follow her in a TV show. Unless you're going to really, really get in there and address her issues with being black. And even then, it took so long to address her, like finally come out and say, Nella has a problem with her blackness. Like I think it was almost like the 75 or 80% mark, where she finally admits that she had issues growing up with the black kids because she felt like she didn't fit in because they went to a very white school and she was in all honors classes and they weren't, and they called her an Oreo. And I'm like, girl, let that hurt go. That was so long ago. So many of us have experienced it, but not all of us sit there and internalize it for life. And that's an important discussion that we need to have too, about how some people hold on to that shit for their life and then use it to justify why they don't want to be a part of the black community, and instead will lean into whiteness as if white people are all so amazing, because you're acknowledging that these people at the office are racist as fuck, but you don't have a problem with them. But you have a problem with black people based off of how they treated you in high school, and you just distance yourself from them with the exception of your one black best friend, and who also kind of distanced herself. Like, how y'all upset about Hazel volunteering to mentor black girls, and y'all are getting mad at white people for not exploring different areas of New York City that are predominantly black, when y'all don't do that your damn selves? Y'all can sit on Twitter and complain about racism, which is actually something that a lot of people do. But again, we needed to have these conversations on page, not just lightly touch upon them while we paint black people against each other in the most nonsensical plot I've read this year. So my disappointment in Blackout was really my own damn fault, because I knew from the time I heard it announced that it was going to be a cash grab anthology, and that's exactly what it was. The only reason why I decided to read it was because it's getting a lot of questions from my followers, like, are you going to read this? Are you going to read this? We would love to hear your review. I'm not doing that again, y'all. This book was such a horrible listen. Definitely worst audiobook I've listened to this year. I'm so glad I did not spend money on it, because I'm on an influencer list for HarperCollins, so I was just like, okay, it's free. I'll go ahead and listen to it. The accents in this book, so bad. How hard is it to find people of that background to narrate the book, especially when you're sinking all the money into this book because it has these top, highly lauded authors within the genre. The Jamaican accents were the worst I've ever heard. I'm not even sure what island they thought they were trying to do, but that was not it. It was just cringy. The Southern accents, horrifying. Like, I had to start telling people, like, I don't even care if you read it or not, just stay away from the audiobook. It was horrible. The accents were so bad in Angie Thomas's story, I can't even tell you what her story was about, because I was so distracted by it. And I'm just like, I don't feel like going back and reading it, because most of these stories were not enjoyable. A few were okay, like Tiffany D. Jackson's was okay. Ashley Woodfolk's was okay. Danielle Clayton's story was so boring, I can't tell you what that was about beyond it taking place in a library. And Nick Stone, you are not a romance writer. What the fuck was that monologue on the train in the dark where he just randomly observes the woman breastfeeding and then comments about it? I don't need a gay teen boy's opinion on whether a woman has the right to breastfeed in public or not. No one asked for that. No one was thinking about that. And I'm like, why the fuck is he staring at her in the dark? And why the fuck is he commenting on this in his mind? It was just clunky and out of place, and it went on far too long and was an odd observation. And it felt like he was trying to get woke brownie points, which is what she does in all of the stories I've read from her. Tries to get those little brownie points that are just unnecessary. You are not, writing about issues are not your thing, and they don't need to be in every single story. Blackout was really a black romance anthology for the people who don't read black romance. Like, the people who've read very, very limited black YA that featured two black people falling in love, and who definitely don't read black adult romance, because this was not it. I'm like, and aren't you supposed to be rooting for people to be together and holding on to those memorable relationships after you read a romance? None of these couples were memorable. I can't even remember any of their names. There was nobody who I'm like, oh my gosh, they were so cute. Oh, it's so good. I'm like, I read way too many reviews that felt fake as fuck, because they said, oh, this was so great, everybody was so cute, I really love these stories, but then they couldn't even detail which couples or which stories they really liked. So did you really like it, or did you like the idea of it? Because I felt like this book really coasted on marketing black joy. This is not the first story to ever feature black joy. I don't know why all of a sudden it's like black joy is such a rarity in black YA. But that's something that really needs to change, because they're putting out too many trauma stories, and then they start trying to and publishers are now trying to capitalize on black joy by giving us these whack-ass stories that do nothing. And when I saw that this book is getting a Netflix adaptation, I'm like, why though? Why? There are so many better written, more deserving stories that deserve to be adapted. This was just not it at all. Premise was interesting, but execution was terrible. Most of these people did not write romance. Even the ones who do steady write romance did not. Like Nicola Yoon, her story was just not gripping. So I just don't think, maybe short story isn't her thing either. So overall, those were the worst stories that I read in 2021. Definitely not the only bad stories I read in 2021. 2021 was really the year that I needed to go read Midlist and Backlist. Those stories were killing it. The really hype stories were all fails. They were just not good. There was a lot of people talking about how they were amazing, but I'm like, where was the writing? Where was the characterization? And I'm hoping 2022 is a lot better because these stories just weren't giving this year. So let me know what your worst stories were for this year. Let me know if you agreed with any of my takes. And remember to hit that like button. And I will talk to you guys soon. Bye!